Michael Douglas, born into the golden halls of Hollywood royalty, was never meant to be ordinary. Heir to one of the most iconic names in the industry, many expected him to walk comfortably in the glow of his father's fame. But from the beginning, Michael seemed less interested in basking in reflected light and more determined to forge his own flame. With unwavering discipline, he stepped onto the cinematic battlefield, not as Kirk Douglas's son, but as a man with a voice of his own. That voice, though often tested, would carry him through decades of towering performances, and eventually, it would echo in the same sacred halls where his father once stood as the Academy called his name, sealing his legacy in gold. On the other side of the world, Catherine Zeta-Jones, a girl from the windswept coast of Wales, was quietly shaping a legacy of her own. No one handed her a crown. The reality behind the curtains was far more complex. Shadows followed them, quietly eroding the perfection people believed they had. Illness, silence. The divorce left behind a void that no amount of applause could fill. Birthdays became reminders of what was missing. Holidays ended in silence. Even the kindness of a new paternal figure couldn't erase the weight Michael carried. The Douglas name was not just a name, it was a burden. Every school blazer, every whispered conversation, every glance from classmates came with expectations he never asked for. He attended elite schools, Allen Stevenson, Eaglebrook, Choate, and walked the hallowed halls that promised prestige. But with every step, he felt like a shadow of someone else's legacy. Behind the scenes, Michael was trying to find a way to exist without being swallowed by the legend of his father. Film sets became both thrilling and torturous. He would watch the lights flood over Kirk Douglas and feel the strange distance of fame, close enough to see, but too far to feel. The boy who longed for connection instead received lessons in how to smile through disappointment, how to perform through pain. But Michael didn't crumble under the pressure. He transformed it. The heartbreak hardened into resilience. The absence became fuel. With polished shoes and practiced grips, he began building his life brick by brick. A fortress of identity, his own, not borrowed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Catherine was learning the same lessons in an entirely different setting. Born on the exact same day as Michael, September 25th. Though 25 years later, her story began in Swansea, Wales. Her father was a baker, her mother, a seamstress. Their home had no hint of Hollywood glamour, but it was rich in something far more enduring: resilience. When Catherine was still a small child, she was struck by a viral illness that nearly took her life. An emergency tracheotomy saved her, but left behind a visible scar beneath her chin. For a child, it could have been a source of shame. In school, children mocked what they didn't understand. Laughter turned into pain, but Catherine, two souls forged in the fire of expectation and isolation, preparing, unknowingly, for the same storm. And when they finally collided, it wasn't perfection that bonded them. It was survival. It was scars. It was the quiet understanding that sometimes the most powerful love begins not in triumph, but in brokenness. In the mid-1960s, Michael Douglas found himself at the University of California, Santa Barbara, seeking a path not paved by his father's footsteps. He threw himself into the study of drama, not just to chase a dream, but to confront a ghost. That ghost, ever present in his mind, was his father's judgment. Kirk Douglas had once told Michael, bluntly, that he didn't think acting was his strength. Those words cut deep. They lingered long after the conversation ended, echoing through classrooms, auditions, and lonely nights spent rehearsing lines no one else had written for him. Critics whispered, was it the Douglas name that got him here, or his own merit? Determined to silence the echoes of nepotism, Michael deliberately sought out roles that were gritty, roles that challenged convention. He starred in Adam at 6 a.m. and Summer Tree, films not known for glamour, but for substance. He wasn't chasing fame. He was hunting truth. Then came television. From 1972 to 1976, the streets of San Francisco placed him in millions of homes every week. But for Michael, it wasn't just a job. It was a crucible. He carried the weight of proving week after week. The irony was almost cruel. The son had achieved what the father could not. And yet, for Michael, the victory was not laced with gloating, but with grief. Because beneath the gold, there was still that boy who wanted nothing more than to hear, "I'm proud of you." Success brought validation, yes, but not always healing. After that, Michael became unstoppable. The China Syndrome in 1979 captured America's fears. Romancing the Stone in 1984 revealed his charm and gave him mass appeal. Then came Fatal Attraction and Wall Street in 1987. With Wall Street, he didn't just win the Oscar for Best Actor. He became a cultural icon. Gordon Gekko's ruthless confidence solidified Michael's place in cinematic history. But with every ovation came a shadow. Applause, after all, does not erase old wounds. And the boy who once longed for his father's presence never stopped remembering the silence that shaped him. Through the 80s and into the early 90s, Michael continued to push boundaries. The War of the Roses, Basic Instinct, and other bold choices showed he wasn't afraid to provoke or polarize. He didn't want to play it safe. Every performance was another brick in the fortress he was building, one that said, "I am not my father. I am myself." While Michael's filmography grew darker and more daring, Catherine was beginning to face her own complex battle, not against a parent, but against a system. Hollywood had opened its doors to her, but only just. And behind those doors, she found expectations that stung more than silence. Though Catherine had already won hearts in the UK with The Darling Buds of May, she quickly realized the US film industry saw her less as an artist and more as a commodity. She was beautiful, yes, but they often treated her beauty like a limitation rather than a gift. Roles were offered, many of them forgettable, smiling, decorative, hollow. The depth she had fought to earn was being ignored in favor of a polished image. Her early film career suffered missteps, and fate soon rewarded her resolve. Steven Spielberg saw her, not just her face, but her fire. After spotting her performance in Titanic, the 1996 TV miniseries, and got back up, she demanded to do her own stunts, not to impress, but to prove. And when Zorro exploded in theaters, audiences didn't just see a beautiful woman, they saw a force. From there, her trajectory changed. Entrapment with Sean Connery, Traffic, and eventually Chicago in 2002, where she delivered a performance that left audiences breathless. She won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, while carrying her daughter during the grueling rehearsals. That image of a woman pregnant, powerful, and unstoppable became a symbol of her journey. Catherine had not been handed success. She had earned it with every scar, every audition, every fight to be seen. While her star rose, Michael's personal life was beginning to fray. In 1977, he had married Deandra Luker, a woman from privilege, someone who initially seemed like the perfect match for Hollywood's rising prince. They had a son, Cameron. For a time, it appeared that Michael was breaking the cycle his father had unknowingly started. But appearances, like red carpets, often hide the cracks underneath. The pressures of fame, travel, temptation, the constant hum of distraction took their toll. Michael admitted later that he was too often absent. Caught in the whirlwind of a career that never stopped spinning, he left behind moments that could never be reclaimed. A skiing accident in 1980 briefly reminded him of his own fragility. But even then, he couldn't slow down. Deandra wanted stability. Michael, by his own confession, was drowning in the noise. What followed were years of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that builds walls between people. Eventually, love faded into routine. They stayed together for over 2 decades, more as an arrangement than a partnership. And in 2000, the marriage ended. For Michael, the divorce wasn't just about lost love. It was about lost time, lost connection, lost chances to be a better father. He saw in Cameron the reflection of a pain he knew too well, an ache he had once carried for his own father. By the late 1990s, Catherine too had tasted the bitterness of broken promises. Relationships with television presenter John Leslie and actor Angus McFadden had ended in betrayal and heartbreak. Engagements dissolved, trust shattered. She had walked away from men who tried to possess her rather than love her, protect her rather than uplift her. Behind her success were scars the cameras never captured, pain disguised as poise. She had learned to smile through whispers and to armor herself against a world that reduced her worth to headlines and who she stood beside. Michael was bold. Too bold, perhaps. He famously told her, "You're going to be the mother of my children." Catherine, having been burned before, didn't swoon. She recoiled. But later, a letter arrived, handwritten, humble, sincere. And slowly, the walls began to fall. Phone calls turned into hours, hours into months. And with each conversation, they found something both had been denied for years: safety. In the hushed hours between coasts and time zones, Michael and Catherine fell into something rare, a connection that didn't require costumes or scripts. In those long-distance conversations, Michael found someone who listened without judgment, and Catherine found someone who didn't want to possess her, only to understand her. There were no flashing cameras, no velvet ropes, just two voices cautiously building a bridge. By New Year's Eve 1999, the cold air of Aspen bit at their skin, but the warmth between them could not be denied. Michael, wrapped in blankets and coughing through a winter cold. The age gap, the spotlight, the relentless tabloid scrutiny, all created a storm they couldn't hide from. Paparazzi violated the privacy of their ceremony, leaking photos that were meant to be sacred. Their love, born from silence and letters, was now dissected by headlines. It was an early warning that their vows would always have to be defended. Still, they endured, because behind the glamour was something more important, a decision. They had chosen each other, not for appearances, but for survival. Soon after the wedding, they made a radical choice. They left behind the flashing bulbs and red carpets of Los Angeles and retreated to Bermuda. It was a bold move, but a necessary one. For Michael, it was more than relocation, it was redemption. He wanted to give his children what he had missed: dinners at home, birthdays filled with laughter instead of distance. For Catherine, it was peace, no longer prey to tabloids. It was their life behind closed doors that defined them. Bermuda wasn't just an escape, it was a sanctuary. In that island haven, Dylan and Karis rode their bikes down quiet lanes, free from the judgment of cameras. The Douglas Zeta-Jones home echoed with laughter, not headlines. They weren't performing there. They were simply living. Then life, ever unpredictable, struck again. Cameron Douglas, Michael's son from his first marriage, began to unravel. The weight of the Douglas name, the shadows of fame and expectation, pushed him into dangerous territory. Addiction, crime, and eventually incarceration followed. Cameron's mugshot was splashed beside Michael's face across tabloids. It wasn't just a family tragedy, it was public shame. Michael, who had sworn to be different from his father, suddenly saw history repeating itself. He had tried to be present, but somehow the ghost had slipped through anyway. Visiting Cameron in prison shattered him. He didn't just see his son in chains. He saw himself, a boy once abandoned by a father chasing applause. The pain was unbearable, and yet in those visits, something else emerged. Forgiveness, not just for Cameron, but for himself. And then came the diagnosis. In 2010, at 66, Michael was told he had advanced tongue cancer. The prognosis was grim. Doctors suggested removing part of his jaw. Instead, Michael chose a brutal path: radiation, chemotherapy, agony. He lost 40 pounds. Even water became painful to swallow. His iconic voice, his instrument, his livelihood, turned into a whisper. But every morning, he told himself, still breathing. Catherine stood by him, unwavering. She didn't flinch, even as her own world began to quake. Shortly after Michael's diagnosis, Catherine began suffering from episodes of depression and mania. It was confusing, terrifying, and at first invisible. She later learned she had bipolar II disorder, a condition that threatened not only her peace, but their entire family's foundation. Twice, she checked herself into treatment. And when the tabloids pounced, she did not hide. She spoke openly, refusing to let shame win. "I wasn't ashamed of needing help," she said. "I was ashamed it took me so long to ask." Their love was being tested, not by betrayal, but by illness, both physical and emotional. And just when it seemed things were starting to heal, a careless moment unraveled it all again. In an interview, Michael mentioned that his cancer had been caused by HPV, a virus often transmitted intimately. His tone was clinical, but the media turned it into scandal. Headlines suggested betrayal, infidelity, disgrace. The truth had been twisted. Catherine, already vulnerable, was now humiliated, her private life reduced to clickbait. Michael was horrified. What he meant as transparency had been reshaped into accusation. The silence that had once destroyed his first marriage threatened to return, not between them, but around them. By 2013, they separated. There were no dramatic press conferences, no screaming matches, just weariness, a quiet announcement. "We need time," they said. For a while, it seemed the fairy tale was over. Michael walked red carpets alone. Most painfully, he appeared at the Deauville Film Festival, where he had once looked Catherine in the eyes and told her she would be the mother of his children. The symmetry was cruel, a beginning marked by boldness, a pause marked by uncertainty. But they weren't finished. They chose each other again. Slowly, quietly, they began to rebuild. Therapy replaced distance. Humility replaced pride. And in 2014, reconciliation began. By 2015, they marked 15 years of marriage. In 2016, they returned to Aspen, the place where he had proposed through coughs and blankets. In 2017, they welcomed their first grandchild through Cameron, a full circle they once feared would never close. They didn't erase the scars. They embraced them, because survival, they had learned, wasn't just about living through the storm. It was about walking through it together. As the storms finally passed, what remained was not the wreckage, but the foundation. A life not rebuilt for the cameras, but reclaimed in quiet rooms, soft laughter, and morning light that no spotlight could imitate. Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones stepped deliberately into a new chapter, not of retirement, but of retreat. A pause not from life, but from a noise that had long threatened to drown it. Today, their combined fortune is estimated at more than $350 million. But their real wealth cannot be measured in dollars or properties. Yes, they own a refined apartment overlooking Central Park in New York, a peaceful refuge in Bermuda, a sprawling 10-acre estate in Mallorca, Spain, surrounded by ancient stone and olive groves. But these are not trophies. They are sanctuaries. In Bermuda, their mornings begin not with headlines, but ocean breezes. Catherine cooks for her family. Michael walks by the sea. They are no longer actors playing parts. They are simply husband and wife, navigating the gentle rhythm of shared days. Michael calls this his season of gratitude. Once obsessed with awards and acclaim, now he measures life by the mornings he wakes beside the woman who stood by him when everything else fell away. He no longer asks for applause. He listens for his children's laughter. He measures success not by roles, but by peace. The Douglas Foundation continues to give generously to education, health, and the arts. It is no longer about legacy. It's about giving meaning to everything they've survived. Catherine, too, has redefined her purpose. She no longer chases roles. She chooses them. With discipline as fierce as ever, she maintains her craft with Pilates, swimming, and mindfulness. She eats with intention, walks with presence, and raises her children with a depth of care forged through both triumph and trauma. She doesn't cling to youth. She embraces grace. And perhaps that is what sets them apart from so many others in their industry. They're not chasing what was. They're nurturing what is. Now, with Dylan and Karis grown and charting their own paths, the house is quieter, but not empty. It hums with memory, with resilience, with the kind of intimacy that cannot be faked on camera. Michael and Catherine walk more slowly now. They talk more deeply. They remember the storms without fear because they survived them. And in surviving, they discovered something rare. That love, true love, is not a thing of perfection. It's not the absence of scars, but the decision to stand beside each other when the world offers every excuse to walk away. Forgiveness became their language, respect their compass, and faith, not blind faith, but faith built on showing up every day, even when the spotlight fades. They are no longer Hollywood's golden couple. They're something far stronger. They are survivors. Michael once said, "We don't need the spotlight anymore to see each other. We choose a softer light, one that lets us see clearly without being blinded." That is the essence of their story. It is a story of falling and choosing to rise, of being broken and choosing to heal, of losing one another and choosing still to stay. They've learned that love is not made in red carpet moments, but in the silence of kitchens. A truth made of storms and sanctuary. A truth made of grace and grit. A truth that reminds us that even in the hardest places, two people can choose to stay. Not because it is easy, but because they remember what it cost to find each other in the first place. And that is what endures.